this was an instrumental aspect of my healing journey, just because, it's one thing to undergo something horrific and terrible and another thing to be misunderstood in the aftermath of that. And so this was really us reclaiming our authorship.
Welcome to Bitch Talk. I'm your host, Erin.
And I'm co-host Ange, aka Captain Party.
And for more than 11 years, the show has celebrated underrepresented voices in pop culture and beyond.
But not in the snore kind of way, which is why our listeners and followers have graciously voted us Best of the Bay, Best Podcast on 48 Hills for 3 years in a row. Three-peat, bitches.
If you like what you hear, follow us on Instagram and check out our website, Bitch Talk Podcast, and rate us wherever you listen to podcasts.
We're begging you to judge us. When does that ever happen? Oh, you're not going to say anything?
Oh, what'd I say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, on that note, on with the show. Clink.
We are here at SFFilm, very excited to bring you a conversation about this short film that is so bae. We are very proud to represent. It's called After What Happened at the Library, and we're sitting here with one of the co-writers, Róisín Isner, and a co-writer / star, Kyle Casey Chu, aka Panda Dulce. Welcome to Bitch Talk.
Thanks for having us.
Hello. Okay, so since this is based on your story, Kyle, why don't you introduce our audience to what this short film is about?
Totally. So I'm one of the founding queens of Drag Story Hour. If you haven't heard of it, it's exactly what it sounds like. Drag queens reading books to kids and their families in libraries, bookstores, schools, etc. In 2022, the Proud Boys stormed my Drag Story Hour at San Lorenzo Public Library. They shouted transphobic slurs, called me a tranny, a pedophile, and an it. I had to retreat to a back room and hide. And when the authorities came, they didn't collect names or information. They just politely dismissed them. No charges were exacted. No action was taken. The men are still at large. And I returned to finish the reading to the kids and the families. And so when I was talking to Róisín about it in one of our weekly writing sessions, she said, let me know when you get tired of people calling you brave. Because she too had suffered an incident that was a public trauma when she was 17. July 4th at Dolores Park, an errant CO2 cartridge bomb caused her to lose one of her fingers. And so we connected over our shared experience of just local and national media breathlessly covering us, pushing certain narratives on us and trying to have us act as like puppets or spokespeople for public issues or take stances or speak on behalf of entire populations. For example, like queer people, trans people, drag queens, people who need increased public safety measures, what have you. And so we wanted to really speak to this unique perspective as public victims. And unfortunately, it's only going to become more common and more frequent as long as social media and the way we consume the news remains fixed. So,
yeah, we also had this theory that the film would be really broadly relatable, even though it was so specific, like superficially, it's very clearly based on Kyle's life. But we had this theory that people who weren't drag queens who survived hate crimes would find themselves relating to pieces of it. And as we've been screening it at festivals, we found that that is true. And yeah, I think a lot of people, especially like all queer and trans and people of color right now, feel politicized in identity. And it can feel like an attack even just legislatively or culturally. So I think that that has also become more relatable.
Kyle, can you talk a little bit about your backstory in terms of the Drag Story Hour and just kind of tell our audience how that happened and how you wound up at the library?
Totally. So I have a background in education and social work. I was a special ed teacher. I was a music teacher, a camp counselor, K through 5 Spanish immersion teacher and SFUSD after school programs. And then I went to get my MSW so I could work with queer youth. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it as a social worker and still stay in San Francisco, close to my family. And so the way that I continued my youth work was through Drag Story Hour. Around 2015, 2016, Michelle T., who founded the program, was looking for drag queens who specifically had youth work experience, which is a little more rare because, as nightlife girls, not all of them, translate to a classroom. You can't really do a death drop in a classroom.
Maybe now you can.
I mean, yeah, never say never.
Yeah.
And so I did it at Eureka Valley. I was a part of a short doc brought on by Fusion Media, and it kind of blew up from there. And I continue that work to this day because it's fun. And Halloween and holiday-themed story hours are just, a good time. Yeah.
Yeah, while we're on that topic, can you tell us how you decide what books are you going to read? What sort of topics do you bring up? And sort of what are the reactions from the kids and the families?
Totally. I think, especially to people who oppose Drag Story Hour for mind-numbing reasons, they kind of write it off as, inherently sexual and inappropriate because, you're in drag, blah, blah, blah. There is drag that is inappropriate. That is in a bar. That is for 21 and plus audiences. This is not that. There's a lot of thought and care that goes into the craft. I practice the characters. I read through these things. I look for comedic moments. And it's not just connecting with the kids. It's also connecting with the parents. And so it's kind of a dual level of performance. In terms of deciding what books I read, it depends on what audience is expected. So, for the younger kids, they might do better with the hips on the drag queen go swish, swish, swish because it's musical and they can engage on two levels. For older audiences, I might have more paragraphs because they have the sitting power for that and they won't just get the wiggles and want to go. And so there are a couple ones that I really love. There's She Wanted to Be Haunted by Marcus Ewert. There's Neither by Arlie Anderson. Yeah, and there's Bodies Are Cool, which is another really fun one that we did at SF Pride 2024. So yeah, it really depends.
If you haven't read She Wanted to Be Haunted, I highly recommend. I found it on her bookshelf the last time I was at Kyle's house and read it and I was like, oh, this is great. It's like a spooky little goth book for children. It's wonderful.
That sounds fun.
I want to go to the readings. That's why I was
me too.
asking.
Yeah, come through.
I'm really excited. Yeah.
More the merrier.
I do want to say when this happened, I remember when I don't know if I saw it on social media first or in the news, but I was really bummed, to say the least, because I went to elementary school in San Lorenzo and I grew up in that area. And just the heart can only take so much. It's like, man, that's was in my backyard and I grew up there. But reliving this and writing it together, can you both talk about that process? And were there things where, Kyle, you're like, yeah, I'm not going to touch that. Maybe Róisín can pick it up from there or vice versa. Can you talk about the writing process and how this, I hope, was healing in a way?
Yeah, so we had already been writing wives for a couple of years. So we had a standing writing calls. We were working on this one feature script. We'd done a Sundance lab. We were cooking. And then this happened, and it was this shocking, devastating thing. And then it became huge. And yeah, Kyle mentioned we had this moment where I was like, well, let me know when you get tired of people calling you brave. And she was like, yes. Because our weekly writing calls had kind of transitioned into just bitch fests about everything that was going on.
Maybe called bitch talk. No.
If you will.
That was the vibe.
Yes.
And so one day I was just like, hey, really early on, probably 2 weeks after it happened, I was like, do you think you might want to write about this? And she was like, I think I do. And at first we couldn't find our way into the story. I think the most obvious way to tell it would be to tell the story of what happened at the library and having that be the beginning, middle, and end. And we did I did an advance guard of a treatment of that, and I hated it. I threw it out. I was like, it's bad. We don't like it. I don't like it. What's it trying to say? It felt leering, I guess.
And it's worth noting that dramaturgically, you want to write from the point of drama. And so obviously the most dramatic events one would assume would be at the actual library. And we got that feedback from a lot of our writing cohort. But then...
Yeah, we were just talking about everything that was going on, and I think everyone sees this window snapshot through the media of this crazy event that happened at the library, but no one was seeing this aftermath that was happening. That I also related to as being sort of the subject of media attention, and how alienating it is and how weird it is, and you feel like an imposter of yourself, and there's this version of you being presented publicly, but it's really flattened, and your experience is messy and complicated, and your memories are not narratively as like coherent as maybe people want them to be, and you're having this reckoning. You're trying to process what happened while also performing it like for an audience, and then also being asked to be an advocate. And so I was like, maybe this is the story. Like, and I was like, picture the scene after what happened at the library.
Yeah.
And so like once we had that concept, then we were like, oh. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was through our shared experience of understanding that I wasn't, I was just really out of sorts, obviously, but there was an extra layer of being asked to perform a victim in the way that people expected me to and thought I should, that belied how I actually felt, which was full of complexity and messiness. And so being put in that position, being put in the position to speak on behalf of so many people, to be an advocate, to have fully formed ideas and opinions, to have a narrative that fit into the formula that journalists wanted to convey, was an added pressure that I think we hopefully get to the heart at in our short.
You definitely do. Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about this because I think it's really powerful how you talk about while you were going through this media frenzy, social media frenzy, even the well wishes seemed like part of the wave or part of the tsunami, which I'm quoting from your director's bio or whatever it was. So can you talk about, from your perspective, how can well wishers, people that really do care about you, be helpful and not part of the wave?
That's a good question. I think part of it is that a lot of the care and the well wishes that came from people I knew was welcome because we had an existing rapport. I think when it turns to idolatry or this sort of dark celebrity or, like, can I take a picture with you? Like, oh, I looked at all your work. Like, I'd love to collab on something with you. When it steps or seeps into opportunism in that way, that's when it kind of needs to be checked. And it's like, are they actually well wishes or is it opportunism and transactionalism?
Or I guess, like, what do you want from this? And
Yes.
is it like, because sometimes someone will like trauma dump and like unload on someone, and it's like, is that the appropriate person to be sharing that with? And it's like, also, I think when we see people communicating, or I think our tiny little ape brains like can't understand that we don't know someone. Like, we hear them speak, we know what their face looks like, we've heard them talk, we've heard them talk about personal things, and so we think we're social animals, and we're like, I know this person, we have had a conversation. You haven't had a conversation. You watched them talk. And we tend to think that things should be roughly equivalent, Like, oh, well, you talked, now it's my turn to talk. So we have this natural inclination to want to respond with the other half of the conversation because we saw someone on TV or on an Instagram reel or whatever. And so I think it's natural, and there's nothing wrong with us having that kind of parasocial inclination. And I think we all have it. So it's just important to be like, is this a mutual conversation, and how many other halves of the conversation is this person being expected to have? And is this helpful or not? And we've had meta moments with this, like, because I knew what she was going through, like what kind of attention she was getting. And so I didn't want to be like that, but I had the same, like, are you okay?
like in the back of your mind, right? But are you okay?
Yeah. We were already besties, so it was different.
Yeah. That's true. And then, like, recently I had, like, a whole thing, and I was, like, an anonymous subject of media attention, and then she was like, do you need any? Yeah. Oh, no.
Because we had this existing, consciousness and understanding.
Yeah. So I think it's, like, we don't want to, like, trash people for having good intentions, obviously, but we do want to, like, point out maybe we can all, as people, be a little better about how we do those interactions, especially with people we don't know or don't know very well. And what are we expecting from it? What are we trying to achieve? How is it going to be received for them? You're one of many people doing this. Keep that in mind. And we can be, just more conscious of it.
I think the other conversation, too, is just because we both have worked kind of in the media landscape. I'm working in it currently, and I do see that, it's the 24-hour news cycle, and then your story gets dropped all of a sudden, and I feel like that's a little shocking, too, because I'm like, is that person okay? How are they doing now, a month out, a year out, whatever that looks like? So in this film, there's a whole scene with the journalist. Have you had conversations or follow-ups with any journalists? Have any of them reached out, checked in? Does that happen? Is that a conversation?
There hasn't been follow-up, but we have followed up with them just because this short pertains to that that dynamic. Mm-hmm. We thought it was important to share not only that, but also as a bookend to the 2022 story.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because sometimes it can feel really strange, especially when a journalist really talks to you and is trying to get you comfortable and to share and be really vulnerable. And then they just like put out the story and it's like, bye.
Yes.
And it can feel like really exploitative and you can feel very used and manipulated. So I will say that it's happened to me maybe twice that a journalist, they were both women, actually like followed up, how are you, and had a conversation with me without the goal of that being the subject of an article. And just to like talk about how I was feeling. And I really appreciate that. And I do think that depending on who the person is and how they feel or whatever, that should be maybe more normal to like help that transition happen.
Yeah, I think that shows a tremendous amount of integrity. And it's also worth noting that, after the flashpoint of this incident and trying to get, the juiciest, most compelling soundbite or performance out of somebody, it leaves you drained and feeling, possibly exploited. I know that was our experience. But it wasn't until I spoke to a trauma-informed journalist who told me at the top of the interview, it's okay to have boundaries. You don't have to touch this, just let me know. We can have a word. That I really broke down. And I think it's because that was my point of realization that this is how all the interviews should have gone, and how putting the need of traumatized survivors before the content of a story is so important, and also that those two things can be directly oppositional in such a rapid news cycle.
Thank you for both of you sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah, and we do have to wrap soon, but you did have your San Francisco premiere, your hometown premiere last night. Can you talk about how it went and how it felt to be amongst your peers, your people?
It was so special and amazing. We're tearing up right now.
I know. I'm tearing up looking at you.
No, I can't imagine. Yes, please.
Yeah, friends and family were there, cast and crew. Even the Donna, who let us shoot in her house in Marin, was there. And also, I just released a book last week, my first book, The Queen Bees of Tybee County. And 2 of my friends came up with the book and asked me to sign it. And so it's been, I met a fellow queer author from Castro Valley. So, as a big point of connection, it's been a very, super low-key week, I guess.
No big deal.
I think we became pretty comfortable with talking about it and sort of like how we would engage and blah, blah, blah. But last night it felt different. Like everything was like more emotionally charged. One of our producers like started crying like during the panel, and like, yeah, it all felt very, very present, very local, like yet very charged. It was, and it was such a beautiful program, and like so many brilliant filmmakers and international filmmakers who'd come from like all over the world, and to like be in that space with them and their like incredible shorts, and it was incredible.
We ate it up. No crumbs.
You should, and you both deserve it. We didn't even get into how beautiful this short film is shot. We unfortunately we couldn't talk to your director, but it looks beautiful. The emotion is there, and it's full circle. It's just incredible that if you think about when this happened to you, one day you would be sharing it with people and it would be empowering, and you'd be here stronger than ever with a community backing you.
Yeah, I think this was an instrumental aspect of my healing journey, just because, it's one thing to undergo something horrific and terrible, and another thing to be misunderstood in the aftermath of that. And so this was really us reclaiming our authorship. And when we returned to the actual library, because it was shot on location at San Lorenzo Public Library, we had an on-set social worker, we had a decompression tent, we had sage, we had little like hand toys in case, somebody needed some relief in that way. Pre-Zoom calls with the folks playing the extremists, just to make sure that they left that mindset on set. A lot of care was taken to make sure the kids were okay and not exposed to that. So the extremists came in and they shouted about marine mammals. But, through movie magic, it appears that they're saying, worse things. But I think, when you experience trauma, it's like something gets stuck mid-cycle and you're not able to release that. And so this allowed me to return to the scene of the crime, return to the circumstances, surrounded by loving support. And it was cathartic.
Thank you so much for sharing both of your stories. It's really beautiful work that you've turned it into. Can you talk about CamFest? When is this going to be airing? And do you want to talk about Drag Happy Hour or Happy Hour? Oh my God!
We need a happy hour. I know.
You see where my head is. Yep. What moving forward? If you're going to be anywhere in the city or anything you want to promote with that?
Yeah, of course. So After What Happened at the Library is screening at CamFest in a shorts block called Let It Out on May 9th at AMC Kabuki. Tickets are on sale now. Our SFFilm screening was sold out, so get on those tickets. Mm-hmm. And in terms of drag story hours, I'll be at Blackbird Books on June 21st.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Again, we've been speaking to co-writer Róisín Isner and co-writer / subject of the story, Kyle Casey Chu. Thank you for being on Bitch Talk.
Thanks so much for having us, Erin and Ange.
Thanks for joining us on today's show. You can find more information about this episode in our show notes.
If you're missing us, you can visit us at bitchtalkpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter and buy us a cup of coffee.
Did you know we're also on the radio? You can find us at bff.fm.
And lastly, rate and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. All the cool bitches are doing it.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.fm podcast network. Learn more at podcast.bff.fm.
BFF.fm, best frequencies forever.